Hey YouTube, I'm Ali, welcome to the channel. Now, if you're a budding game designer, one of the best things you can do to learn to make your own board games is by playing lots of other people's games. That'll give you inspiration, ideas, mechanics, themes, the lot. So get out there and play. But what if you can't get out there and play? Well, that's okay. That's why I exist. That's not why I exist, but that's why this channel exists, and that's why I'm on it. I'm going to go off and do those things and then present back to you what I've learned. Today, we're going to be looking at cards and getting information onto those cards, sharing that information in your board game, the best ways, some tips, some bits and pieces. Stay tuned, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so, and hopefully you'll find this episode useful. So let's start with the face of the card and text on a card. Now I'm going to go through some fairly basic ideas here, but I think these are key in understanding how to build a really useful and clearly usable card in your game. Right, we're going to start with the amount of text. Again, there's a simple mantra that's used over and over again with designers and the design forums that I've looked at, which is make it work and make it pretty. That's the only two things you really need to concentrate. Now, when it says make it work, what they mean here is put the minimum amount of information you need on that card to convey what that card does. One of the things I've noticed that in deck builders or in games that use events, it's okay to have quite a lot of text. And quite a lot, I mean 3 or 4 lines, maybe a third of the card. But in most games when you're playing, you don't want a lot of text. Very few people will have time to read through during a game, especially if it's a fast-paced game, to read through the text and understand what it does. The cards have got to be written in a way to contain the most important, pertinent bits of information you can possibly put on there in the shortest space. So that's the first bit. Keep it short, keep it simple, but only what you need to on your card. Secondly, let's talk about the consistency of where that text appears. Now, cards are often sectioned up into different areas, and usually large bits of text go at the bottom of the card with a nice little picture on top. That may be relevant for those games, but you want to make your text, and the important bit here is keep it consistent. Wherever you're going to put the text, put it in the same place all the time. If you have symbols on your card, and we're going to come on to those in just a minute, but again, keep that consistent. The text itself needs to be legible, and that's one of the key factors, in fact, that I've got in my 5 things that make a good board game. Having legible text is key. You've got to use a font that everyone can read, especially people like me, old and blind folk. Make the text visible to all. Very important piece there. Now, one of the other things that's overlooked often in games, again, that I notice, is if a card has a list of instructions or list of possibilities that you can choose from, put them in the order that the game will allow you to play them. Put them in a meaningful order so that the instructions are followed from top to bottom. Again, a very key point which seems to be missed occasionally from some of the big games. I think Arkham Horror is a good example of where you're given a list of things to do or a list of possibilities you can do, but they're in a random order, or they're seemingly in a random order. And the last thing I'm going to say about putting text on cards is design your cards so that if they're going to be picked up and held in your hand, the text is visible in the appropriate place. Design it so that it's usable by both a left-handed person and a right-handed person. Very often that's overlooked as well. Good design means catering for a wider audience, because a wider audience means you're going to get more people, hopefully, to like your game. This video really is trying to demonstrate that cards can hold lots of information in lots of different ways. The one we're going to talk about next is artwork, iconography, and patterns. Patterns in particular interest me because they can differentiate different decks of cards in your game. If you have multiple different decks, one good way of differentiating different decks is simply having a different pattern. What is important in my mind, though, is to have not just a different pattern, but a different color as well. Have 2 ways of determining the difference. And in fact, that's probably a key element I should mention now that I found out as I read and researched this topic. A lot of people forget that there are folk out there who are colorblind and may just have a pattern that is repeated multiple times on the backs of cards, but is of a different color. If you're colorblind, you won't not necessarily see that, and in fact, all patterns then look the same. Again, you're reducing your audience and you don't want to do that. So when it comes to putting patterns, make your patterns distinctive, make them different colors, put them on the backs. Fine. Let's talk about iconography, which normally appears on the front of your card. Now, icons, again, just like text, need to be consistent. They need to be meaningful. Put down a simple to understand icon with a clear key, probably in your instruction book or in your reference book, reference card, or on the back of the box if needs be. But make it clear and make it meaningful. Give it some effort and some attention to ensure that the icon you're showing isn't just a square. It is something that symbolizes clearly the action or the property that you want to give that on your card. Icons are great, and I love seeing icons on card because they generally, once you've got used to them, speed up gameplay significantly. You don't have to read lots of text, you just look at an icon. Key thing there though is keep it consistent, keep it in the same place, same rules as text, make it visible for people with left-handed and right-handed, same rules as the patterns I mentioned, make sure that you aren't just using colors that colorblind folk can't see, make them distinctive patterns, make them distinctive icons. Finally, in this section, I'm going to talk about artwork. Now, artwork for me exists in two ways. You're going to have artwork that's there to give your card pop value, to give them theme, more importantly, but also to make them potentially signify the significance of a card. If your card's a dragon card and a pack of monsters, dragons generally are quite strong. Having a really powerful drawing of a dragon or a picture of a dragon on a card, I'm imagining a card there, could actually convey instantly that you've got a good card in your hand without even looking at the text or the icons. Important. Now, one thing I do want to say about artwork is that it should not, in my view, ever stop the function of the card coming through. Function always comes ahead of form in my world, i.e. making it work is more important than making it pretty. So what I mean by that is don't have artwork that completely engulfs the card, making it impossible for you to see the icons or the text that's there. If you've got a game like Dixit, for example, where artwork is the function, well, then that's okay. But generally, my view is artwork, either have it as the background or have it as the top 1 to 2/3 of the card with your clear icons embossed on top of it. As well as patterns on the backs of cards, you can also have different sizes of cards to show differences in different kinds of decks in your board game. I recently did a review of Chronicles of Crime. In there, I talked about evidence cards that were much smaller than the main cards. The benefit there that I had was I could instantly locate when I came to game setup, or even when I came to play the game, where my evidence cards were, not just from the backs of the cards, but for the fact that they were much smaller. Now, a quick word on the size of cards. One thing I've noticed, and again in my research and in doing this video, is that when you build a game that's designed to be played in your hand, i.e. if you're playing a deck builder or a game which is predominantly holding cards in your hand, bigger cards are definitely more favorable. If you're holding many cards, obviously you don't want them to make them too big, but if you're holding 5 or 6 cards, having oversized playing cards is actually quite favorable, it would appear. Conversely, if the cards you've got in your game are components, not the main playing piece, but components of an overall board game, and they are going to be predominantly sitting on the board, or either your own player board or the main board, i.e. on a table, then actually making them smaller definitely has an advantage. Making them smaller means that you're going to occupy less space. So having smaller cards for games where you're predominantly playing onto a board probably is where you want to go. Main cards that you hold in your hand, big. Cards that you play on your board, small. There we go. In the same way that text and icons can give meaning to cards, the orientation, i.e. the way you put the card down in front of you, can also give you some information. Games like Spartacus, for example, which is a board game that we absolutely love in this house, bizarrely. When you're playing a gladiator and they've been wounded in battle, the way you show that they are wounded is by turning the card sideways, so that the long edge is now facing the rest of the opponent, the rest of the players. Similarly, there are plenty of games out there, especially deck building games, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Pokemon, where you turn a card to the side to show that it's either ready, waiting to go, or that it's just been attacked and can no longer function, use its power that round. Orientation does play a part in how you present your cards. And that's important because, again, when it comes to designing your cards, you want to make sure that your text or your icons are viewable in the orientation you're going to play them. But importantly, the point I'm trying to get across here is don't just play your cards as if you're playing Snap. Don't just put them straight down. There are other ways you can orientate them to give them information. One of the great games I backed on Kickstarter was a game called The Agents, way back when. Now, they used a really clever mechanism of symbols right on the top edge and the bottom edge of their cards. If the two cards met and orientated themselves correctly, symbols would be formed, and those symbols gave you different capabilities or powers. Depending on which orientation you turned your card would give you different powers. Some would be advantageous to you, but also to your opponent, and some wouldn't. So there's scope there in the orientation of the card. That's what I'm trying to get across. And finally, the shape of the card. Yes, you could actually impart some information in the shape of the card, though I'm going to struggle to think of an example. I recently did a review of Ego, where the shape of the cards, which is really just an Uno skin, the shape of the cards was circular. I found them difficult to hold, but they did add the element of theme, which was important in Stranger Things, because the cards were round, the same shape as the Ego waffles that they were supposed to represent. So yeah, for theme, they're good. The bit that I will say is important, though, is when the cards become tiles and form part of the game board you're building. A good example is King Domino. The shape of the tile is very important there because it has to fit in with other tiles as you lay them down to form a square 5 by 5. Again, you want consistent, same-sized cards all the way through. Having odd shapes could potentially allow you to play different cards, fitting them together in different ways to gain some advantage. So I can't think of a game that does that at the moment. If you can, please put them down in the comments. But the point I'm trying to get across is, as well as orientation, the shape of the card could potentially offer yet another way of putting information across in your game. Well, folks, that was my run through of tips that I thought you might find useful when it comes to putting information onto cards in board games. It's all stuff that I learned as I went off and discovered info about designing my own card game, which is still in the works and will be shared soon. Guys, if you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you like this kind of content, and then consider subscribing to the channel, because, you know, that's a decent thing to do. For now, though, guys, look after yourself, stay safe, try to play as many games either online or in person if you can afford to do that. And by that, I mean, you know, being safe, social distancing and all that. But until next time, guys, look after yourselves. This is Ewok. She's the cat you can hear in the background. Off you go.